coming up. People accused of crimes stuck in jail with no legal representation across the country.
He has no help. He has no one to turn to.
It's not an exaggeration to say it is a constitutional crisis.
A problem forcing judges to dismiss serious crimes.
It's broken. Public defense in our county is broken at this point.
Presumed innocent, yet still punished. Some waiting a decade behind bars for their day in court.
Nobody talks about it. They don't believe it because it's been 10 years.
This is the longest that someone has been held pre-trial in American history.
It should bring chills to all of us when we realize that any of us can be accused of a crime.
A civil rights organization now taking action following multiple Atlanta News First investigations.
The Georgia Public Defender Council is obstructing access to public records.
Lawmakers respond with possible solutions, and we travel across state lines in search of a better way.
You can't defend a modern criminal prosecution unless you have resources like us.
The 6th starts now. Hello, I'm investigative reporter Andy Perotti. The Sixth Amendment of the Constitution guarantees all of us the right to an attorney if we can't afford one and a speedy trial. Yet we uncovered people languishing in jails for years without legal representation, delaying justice for victims and those accused of crimes.
So before I ask you any questions, you need to understand your rights. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can be used against you in court. You have the right to talk to a lawyer for advice before we ask you any questions, and to have him or her with you during questioning. If you cannot afford a lawyer, one will be appointed for you before any questioning if you wish.
A detective reads Trevor Van Marco his rights, arrested for his alleged involvement in an armed home robbery in 2018.
You have information but no proof. I was not there.
When Trevor declined to answer questions, the investigator pushed back.
I'm not some little punk that you deal with on the street. Are we clear? Are we clear? So take a step back and a deep breath and calm down.
The 18-year-old, who had never been in serious trouble in the past, faced up to 65 years in prison.
And you could be here for a long time.
Trevor couldn't afford an attorney or the $25,000 bail, so he sat in jail in Wood County, Wisconsin, and waited for his court-appointed attorney. His mom and sister say Trevor called the state's public defender office every day, asking for a lawyer.
And he's like, Mom, they literally laughed at me on the phone, like, yeah, right, you're waiting for a lawyer. You know, like there's a lot of other people too.
Trevor's fellow inmates witnessed him struggle too.
Like he was calling for weeks to get a public defender. They kept saying, oh, we don't have one, we don't have one yet.
On the Davis court hearing, Trevor walked into court alone. According to court transcripts, the judge told him you do have a right to ask questions of the officer, although if you had an attorney here, they would tell you not to do so. At the end of the 30-minute hearing, the judge decided there was enough evidence to charge the teen. When Trevor tried to protest the ruling, citing no representation, the judge told him that will be something you can discuss with your attorney.
So not only you have this young teen that has never been in serious troubles trying to navigate the system, but he's alone. He has no guidance from anybody.
Later that night in jail, Trevor took a shower, went to church, tied a blanket around his cell door and neck, and let go.
Cammy, this is Lee at the Wood County Jail. We need an ambulance as soon as possible.
He has the pulse, but we need an ambulance here.
I remember laying in my bed and I heard her yell up the stairs. All of a sudden I just hear, Trey hung himself, Trey hung himself. So.
What do you think drove him to do what he did?
I think the detectives and not having a public defender.
Do you think he would have taken his own life if he had a public defender that day?
No. I just think it would have given him hope. He would have had a voice. He would have been able to say, you know, this is what happened. You know, he would have been able to have somebody there to guide him through the system, you know, and it's like everybody makes mistakes, but when you're in a situation like that, it's your right to have that representation there, and it was essentially taken away from him.
Wisconsin's public defender office says agency staff made approximately 300 calls and emails to private attorneys certified to take state public defender cases, but did not find the teen a lawyer in time for his court date. The state suffered from a public defender shortage when Trayquell needed one. 4 years later, today, it's worse than ever.
We have a shortage of attorneys in central and northern Wisconsin.
There is a constitutional crisis because of delays linked to a lack of public defenders.
That's the challenge in virtually every city in our state.
A fundamental right to an attorney falling apart across the country. In Oregon, the state has 1/3 of the public defenders it needs, according to the American Bar Association. In New Mexico, it needs 67% more lawyers to adequately represent defendants. And in Atlanta, Georgia...
Good morning, Mr. Robinson. How you doing?
Good morning. I'm doing good.
It's easy to spot the problem nearly every day in Fulton County Court. People charged with crimes, waiting for a court-appointed attorney.
How long that gonna be?
If I had an answer, I'd give it to you. We are working through an unacceptable crisis, and you're not the only one.
In Fulton County alone, court records show 113 people indicted for crimes did not have an attorney this past August, many in jail for months, 29 of them longer than a year, nearly all of them black, including Demario Phillips.
How are you today?
Good.
The 19-year-old charged with murder sat in jail 11 months and did not have a lawyer for this court hearing. He says he's innocent. Demario's parents asked the judge for help.
We're trying, we can't afford an attorney.
Right.
Prices are like so high.
I want to be real clear. The expectation is not, why don't you go get a lawyer? That's not required. If you cannot afford one for your son, the state of Georgia has an obligation to get a lawyer for your son. And the state of Georgia is not living up to its obligation right now.
Frida and Demario Sr. are the teen's parents.
What was your reaction when he said that?
I was shocked. We keep doing the same dance. We go to these status hearings knowing that they haven't found him a lawyer yet.
That problem needs to be fixed soon. And if it's not, I think you're going to start reading about it in the newspapers with lawsuits, and that may be what it takes.
Robert McBurney is the Fulton County Superior Court judge behind the camera.
What we have right now is akin to the scenarios that we decry when we say, well, look at the criminal justice system in China or Iran, where people can get scooped up and held without charges or without it being made clear what's going on, and most importantly, no due process. They're stuck, they're silenced, and they don't have a next court date other than to come back and see the judge who says, this is a travesty.
How does this impact crime victims?
No closure. You may want your day in court, you may have a sense of vengeance, you may just want to know that the person who did this is being put away somewhere safe so that it doesn't happen to the next person. When you call the district attorney's office to say what's going on with my case, the answer is nothing, because there's no lawyer for the defendant.
There is growing concern the right to an attorney at the state level could be overturned by the U.S. Supreme Court. In 2019, Justices Clarence Thomas and Neil Gorsuch wrote an opinion alluding they disagree with the landmark ruling, writing, "The Sixth Amendment does not guarantee access to an attorney with any level of reliability or a reliable result."
It should bring chills to all of us when we realize that any of us can be accused of a crime.
John Rapping is president of Gideon's Promise, a national public defender advocacy organization.
Undoubtedly, there are people sitting in jail accused of crimes who are innocent. We can't possibly know that until they get a lawyer who can gather information and shine light on what actually happened. So having a lawyer early is the only way we can feel confident that people that are incarcerated actually committed the crimes that they're accused of committing.
A failure in the criminal justice system impacting the poor, including Trayquell Van Marco.
I mean, my brother, he was never in serious trouble. We never expected this to happen to him. It shouldn't have happened to him. He shouldn't have been put in a situation where he lost hope and he felt his only way out was to take his life. He was 18 He had so much more life to live.
Well, I wish you were here in the morning, because it is something when these guys are working.
Jay Blight takes us behind the scenes of his dry cleaning business, B Cleaners, a Portland, Oregon staple since 1951. Conveyor belts, usually full of clothes, show signs of economic strain.
Oh my gosh, especially now, yeah. I mean, we're facing not only lowered sales, but our expenses are spiraling upwards, our labor spiraling upwards.
A business owner struggling to survive hit with another setback in September. Someone broke 2 of his windows, costing him $1,200 each to replace, the 4th time in the past few years.
It's compounding the pain and agony. Yeah, it really is. And it's exhausting. You just want to throw in the towel, honestly. It's really difficult.
The man police say did it, Tyler Miller, caught in this surveillance video breaking windows at 5 other storefronts the same day. Police immediately made an arrest. Blight thought the man would face consequences for the crime. Instead, court records show a judge released the 29-year-old hours later because the state of Oregon did not have a public defender to represent him.
How does that make you feel?
I don't want to say that we feel that downtown Portland's lawless, but it's certainly, I mean, if you go downtown, there's graffiti, there's boards everywhere, so it just kind of fits what's happening in the city.
What's happening is a constitutional crisis in Portland. People arrested for crimes, but no court-appointed attorney to represent them required by law. According to the American Bar Association, Oregon has 1/3 of the public defenders it needs, a systemic problem we found happening from coast to coast. In Portland, the county seat of Monoma County, judges have dismissed at least 173 felony cases due to the shortage, cases involving property crimes, stolen vehicles, and domestic violence.
It's broken. Public defense in our county is broken at this point.
Mike Smith is the Monoma County District Attorney.
What kind of message do you think this sends the crime victims?
Oh, it's a terrible message. And what it leads to, I think, is a lack of trust in the system. You know, I came forward, I reported this crime. I expect there to be accountability. And now you're telling me that because of some decision or lack of resources at a different level of government, my case was dismissed? It doesn't make sense.
No attorney is available to appoint.
This October hearing illustrates another part of the problem. In this case, a Monoma County judge declined to dismiss charges against a man accused of felony burglary who had no public defender, but still released him if he promised to return for his next court date. Listen to the judge give the man advice.
And, you know, use your good sense where you can, given that you don't have the advice and assistance of a lawyer.
Unfortunately, the way that that's played out, we've seen in our numbers, over 1,000 cases have been in that posture, and then the defendant doesn't come back. They fail to appear at the subsequent hearings.
An emerging problem while Portland suffers from another crisis. Gun violence and homicides have increased over the past 2 years.
In a 24-hour span, officers investigated 10 shootings that left 10 people struck by gunfire.
It's not an exaggeration to say it is a constitutional crisis.
Stephen Singer is the former executive director of Oregon's Public Defender Office. He says the pandemic didn't create the problem. It exposed decades of underfunding, low pay, and overwhelming caseloads in public defender offices across the country.
And then wham, you get the pandemic and the great resignation and all of these labor shortages on top of that, and it all of a sudden explodes into view.
According to the American Bar Association report, Oregon's public defenders would have to work 26 hours a day to catch up on the current caseload. Singer says judges are doing the right thing, dismissing cases when defendants don't have an attorney.
Not only is it appropriate, I think it's actually constitutionally required, and I wish there were more judges across the country that would exercise that necessary power, because that's the only way you're going to fix the problem.
It's not just happening here in Oregon. We've uncovered other court systems across the country taking similar drastic measures to respond to the crisis. In Wisconsin this year, a judge dismissed drug charges against this man after the 46-year-old waited in jail more than 100 days for the state to find him a public defender.
Wisconsin Supreme Court is now in session.
His case appealed to the state's Supreme Court because the judge's dismissal allowed the district attorney to re-indict him in the future.
And we ask that this court today find that the Sixth Amendment is violated when an eligible defendant is not timely provided counsel.
And in response to shortages in 2004, Massachusetts' highest court ruled that defendants who wait for counsel more than 45 days are entitled to have their charges dismissed.
The judge doesn't have a choice. It's unconstitutional to hold somebody in custody without an attorney.
A problem eroding the public's trust in the criminal justice system, while the accused and victims suffer the consequences of inaction.
I don't have the solution, no.
You just want it fixed.
I just want it fixed.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Tony Turner.
Is Mr. Turner here?
Sheriff deputies forget to bring an inmate before a judge for a scheduled hearing this past September in Atlanta.
Oh, okay. Well, he was requested, so I'm not sure what happened there.
So Janie Weaver argues the case on the defendant's behalf.
We put in a motion for dismissal due to lack of no counsel. I spoke with you several times. You also stated that his rights have been violated due to the lack of counsel. We're trying to get it resolved today.
She's talking about Tony Turner, held on sex trafficking charges he says he did not commit, one of 10 charged in the same crime. He sat in jail for nearly 5 months with no court-appointed attorney to represent him.
Which is why the cameras are here, because they are here to see how this outcome is going to come out.
Weaver is Turner's fiance. She filed this handwritten motion to dismiss the case herself.
Are you an attorney?
No, I'm not.
What do you do for a living?
I am a certified nurse assistant, and I also work for Amazon. So he's kind of like stuck. He doesn't have no representation at all, no help at all, none, besides the little bit that I give him.
Turner is not alone. According to records from the Georgia Public Defender Council, the agency responsible for appointing attorneys to people who can't afford one, at least 620 people charged with crimes in the state did not have a lawyer this past summer, some in jail for months. Judges in Fulton County, the state's largest, calling it a constitutional crisis.
They are waiting for that lawyer to help them through this complicated, serious process. And it is an unacceptable crisis that there are people sitting incarcerated, not able to move their case forward because the system can't find them a lawyer.
In August, the Southern Center for Human Rights threatened litigation if the state doesn't fix the problem, writing in this letter to the agency that the Georgia Public Defenders Council is in breach of its clear mandatory statutory responsibility with respect to hundreds of indigent persons accused of crimes. Amateo Ali is the agency's director.
How do you respond to that?
We're assigning our clients attorneys as soon as we know about them. To say there's a constitutional crisis, I disagree with that.
The director says she joined the agency during the height of the pandemic, inheriting staffing shortages. Earlier this year, she helped increase employee salaries by 6% and created a system she claims automatically assigns attorneys within 72 hours, claiming the agency now has enough attorneys to represent defendants.
How can you characterize and say you have enough when you have so many other people saying that it's a crisis?
So these are people who don't know what's going on in-house.
Even judges?
Even judges. Because see, when you don't have the whole story, you only base your information on what you have.
She blames judges for not notifying her office when defendants show up to court without representation, saying that could be one reason her office doesn't always know about unrepresented clients.
I've only been in this position for 2 years, but in my 32 years of being with the public defender system, in one capacity or the other, this last 2 years have been the most phenomenal.
Do you buy that?
No.
These 6 former state and county public defenders disagree.
I absolutely would not have left, but for
The turmoil in the office.
All left their jobs since Director Ali joined the agency in March 2020.
At this moment, we're bleeding from our staffing right now.
And all blame her for not doing enough to support agency staff. Camille Reddick worked at the agency for more than a decade.
I did not leave. I was terminated after I began to yell at the top of my lungs that the way we were handling business and the way we were treating persons who could not afford an attorney was in violation of the Constitution.
Mary Beth Snyder, David Cooper, and Linda Day say the agency didn't provide basic office supplies to do their jobs.
Things like paper, pens, envelopes.
I couldn't find folders for
No.
a long time.
They took away everything. They told us we would have offices, and they're like, oh no, just kidding. No offices.
While Day quit the agency, she still represents defendants for the state agency as a contract attorney in Clayton County, just outside of Atlanta.
I have 500 clients now.
500?
500. My trial partner has 500.
Is that manageable?
No, it's not. You're pissing on fires as they come up because there's no other way to do it. So cases don't really get looked at until they show up on a trial calendar.
Do you think that's manageable?
She was not a contractor when she was
She
here.
is currently a contract attorney in Clayton County.
In Clayton County, and now let me explain to you how the system works.
Is that manageable?
It is not manageable, but it would be unfortunate for Clayton County to allow that to happen, and I don't believe that is true.
It was true. Take a look. The state's case management system shows Day's caseload actually increased to 687 just days after our interview with the director.
A shocking lack of transparency.
Brandon Bullard is the former director of the agency's appellate division responsible for appeals, an important layer of public defense that ensures verdicts are fair. 2 years ago, Director Ali proposed cutting $1 million from his office to address budget deficits during the pandemic.
One, it was the first I heard of it, and I was the director of that office. Two, coincidentally, $1 million was roughly the collective salaries for myself and
For the entire division?
for the entire office, yeah.
Why would you not speak with him knowing that he's the head of a division in your agency before making those cuts?
I never met Mr. Bullard. And you're talking about 5 disgruntled employees who are no longer here.
I left because I had no faith that the present leadership was going to be invested in the quality of representation or would have any respect for the people who were doing the work.
Whatever reason people are leaving and you see that your ability to represent people is being compromised, it is incumbent upon you to respond to that and ensure that we don't get to the salacious place that we are currently.
Your Honor, if I may speak.
The day Weaver asked the judge to dismiss her fiance's case, 2 other inmates appeared in court without legal representation.
Do you have a lawyer? Is anyone coming to speak with you? No. No?
In each case, the judge acknowledged the defendant's constitutional rights were violated. His suggestion, contact the civil rights organization currently threatening to sue the state.
Did you all call the Southern Center?
Do we call who?
The Southern Center?
What does that say about the system?
The system has failed us.
People accused of crime stuck in jail with no legal representation across the country. From Georgia.
He has no help. He has no one to turn to.
To Oregon.
And it's eroding the trust in our system. That's dangerous.
And Wisconsin.
Your right to have that representation there, and it was essentially taken away from him.
Nearly every state impacted by shortages in public defenders. Legal representation provided to those who cannot afford an attorney. A right protected under the 6th Amendment of the Constitution. No longer fulfilled as promised. An issue Congresswoman Suzanne Bonamici from Oregon knows well. Judges in her district have dismissed hundreds of felony criminal cases due to the shortage this year.
It really concerns me
that our court system cannot operate as it should because there aren't enough public defenders.
To address the shortage, the Congresswoman filed a bill this past November that could fund up to $250 million of grants to state public defender offices. The legislation also calls for up to $75 million in student loan reimbursement and pay equity with prosecutors.
People who are working in district attorney's offices and prosecuting crimes are making more than people who are defending. So the pay disparity is there. We need to have programs that encourage people to go into the important work of defense.
In Georgia, some lawmakers are pledging to compel its state to provide more information on caseloads, staffing numbers, and legislative solutions. This after Investigate TV uncovered hundreds of people charged with crimes with no legal representation over the past year, some languishing behind bars for months. State Representative Josh McLaurin says the blame lies on the Georgia Public Defenders Council, the agency in charge of finding lawyers for indigent defendants.
It's one thing to just be incompetent and be unable to manage the pressures at your agency. It's another thing to not care. And I think really meaningful oversight would answer those questions.
This week, the Georgia Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers calling the public defender shortage a travesty of constitutional proportion. Representative McLaurin doesn't think the council's director, Amateo Ali, is fit to lead the agency.
I don't. The number of reports about her and the quality of those reports has been overwhelming. It seems to be that there's a broad consensus that she is at best indifferent to whether public defense is effective and funded enough in this state.
And to me, Republican Governor Brian Kemp, who appointed Ali, stands by the director, emailing, "We fully expect the improvements she has implemented to continue." The search for solutions to fix a problem plaguing the judicial system, violating the rights of those accused of crimes.
It's not a partisan issue that the Constitution has a right to counsel in a criminal case. It's not a partisan issue that everyone wants the court system to be working as it should.
What's the caseload, the average caseload that a public defender is carrying now?
Linda Day watches a Georgia legislative hearing.
I want to throw up.
In disbelief.
I feel like I've been punched in the gut.
The cause of her frustration? Amateo Ali, the director of the Georgia Public Defenders Council, telling lawmakers at the State House last week that her agency does not have enough attorneys to represent people accused of crimes.
The most issue is not funding. The issue is we still cannot find attorneys.
A surprise admission, because that's not what the director told Atlanta News First 2.5 months ago. Today, does your agency have enough attorneys to represent defendants in Georgia?
Absolutely. This last 2 years have been the most phenomenal.
Working in that agency right now is just not feasible.
Linda is one of several state public defenders who resigned over the past 2 years, blaming Director Ali for not doing enough to support agency staff.
It made me understand how completely out of touch she is, living in an ivory tower that's not connected to what's happening with public defenders on the ground.
Growing resentment from some public defenders after an Atlanta News First investigation that uncovered at least 600 people accused of crimes without legal representation last year, some waiting in jail for months. It's not the only issue the director flipped on after our interview. In November, we told Director Ali about Linda struggling to represent hundreds of defendants at a time as a contract public defender in Clayton County.
You're pissing on fires as they come up. So cases don't really get looked at until they show up on a trial calendar.
The director didn't believe her.
It would be unfortunate for Clayton County to allow that to happen, and I don't believe that is true.
Last week, Director Ali told lawmakers it's not uncommon for public defenders throughout the state to juggle 400 cases at a time.
That's still very, very heavy.
It's very
caseload.
high, and we're going to be meeting. I have just sent out an inquiry to 6 of the highest circuits.
When you heard her say that, what was your reaction?
Only 6? And where is she getting her information from?
Can you give me a range?
State Representative Scott Holcomb is the lawmaker who asked the director about the caseloads.
I'm a practicing lawyer, so to have a caseload of over 400, that's very concerning to me. I don't know how any lawyer can diligently work through a caseload of that size.
We've not been able to find attorneys.
No kidding.
At the end of the month, Linda's contract with Clayton County to represent hundreds of people expires, and there are no current plans to replace her.
In simplest terms, how does this impact people accused of crimes?
If they're in jail, it means they sit longer. And it means that you sit until the DA's office indicts you.
Good morning, everyone. All right, let's take up Mr. Wilson. We have some things going on with your case, 19 SC 168093.
Orkez Wilson appears in front of a Fulton County judge this past February, more than 4 years after charged with murder. Emily Gilbert is his sixth court-appointed attorney.
It is a lot of attorneys over 4 years, yes.
Wilson says he's innocent, so his new attorney is pleading for the judge to force the Georgia Public Defender Council to provide her with an investigator to properly review the case. The state agency is responsible for representing people accused of crimes who could not afford an attorney. Wilson faces life in prison without parole.
And I'm asking the court to comply with the Constitution and allow Mr. Wilson to have an effective attorney that will include an investigator. It helps me understand the lay of the land in the case. It helps me understand, what certain witnesses are going to say or not going to say. But I can't advise him intelligently if I don't have an investigator to assist me in a case that's this serious.
The Defender Council said no. They agree Wilson needs an investigator, but their attorney says the agency shouldn't pay for it.
We're just arguing that it's not the correct procedure in this case.
What was your reaction?
To be honest, I wasn't surprised because this has been my experience.
Why wasn't she surprised? Gilbert resigned from the Defender Council in 2021 after working there for a decade, writing in her resignation letter that I can see no end to the persistent lack of urgency about adequately staffing this office and compensating our investigators. She's now a contract attorney for Fulton County, which created its own public defender program last year because the Defender Council could not retain or hire enough attorneys to represent people languishing in jail for months without representation, including Wilson.
I was deeply concerned about the direction of the agency.
Her frustration echoed by other former state public defenders who left their jobs over the past 2 years due to lack of resources.
Things like paper, pens, envelopes.
I couldn't find folders for
No.
a long time.
They took away everything. They told us we would have offices, and they're like, oh no, just kidding. No offices.
Gilbert says her request for an investigator is an attempt to level the playing field in an already imbalanced system up against the resources of the Atlanta Police Department and the District Attorney's Office. According to one report from the Department of Justice, 40% of all county-based public defender offices had no investigators on staff. A statistic that caught John Oliver's attention in 2015, highlighting challenges facing public defenders.
That's 40% of lawyers forced to sit at their desks, Googling where to get exonerating evidence and hitting I'm feeling lucky.
Back in court, the judge sided with Gilbert.
It's the Georgia Public Defenders Council's responsibility by law to provide those services.
Ordering a reluctant agency mandated to represent the state's most vulnerable to provide the required resources her client needs to get a fair shake.
The state has it, the DA has it, my client should have it too.
April 11th, 2023.
Sonia Holmes prepares a postcard to send to her son,
We miss and love you.
who she hasn't seen in years, mailing at least one every week.
It's just a quick hello to always let him know that he is being thought about.
Her son, Maurice Jimerson, lives less than 7 miles away. But behind the concrete walls and barbed wire of the Dougherty County Jail. In 2013, police arrested Maurice and 4 others for the same double murder. For the past 10 years, he spent the majority of that time behind bars, legally innocent, yet never given an opportunity to tell his side of the story at trial.
Nobody talks about it. There is no news coverage. Nothing is said about it. Even if I tell somebody that Maurice, where is Maurice? How is Maurice? Well, Maurice is still locked up. They don't believe it because it's been 10 years.
There are multiple reasons for delays in Maurice's case, from the pandemic to a flood in the courthouse in 2021. But the district attorney says the current delay is directly linked to Maurice having no attorney to represent him. Court records show his last lawyer withdrew from the case in July 2022. From jail, Maurice wrote the court, "I need a public defender for my case. I've been waiting for a trial date." 8 months later, he still didn't have an attorney.
This is a problem that is at a crisis level right now and is likely to get worse.
Maya Chowdhury is an attorney for the Southern Center for Human Rights. Over the past few months, she's traveled across the state, tracking down people in jails charged with crimes with no court-appointed attorney. The Sixth Amendment of the Constitution guarantees everyone accused of a crime the right to a speedy trial and an attorney if they cannot afford one.
For so many of the people that I've met with in jails who've been there for months and sometimes years, I'm the first attorney that they've seen.
To identify how many people need an attorney, the civil rights organization submitted multiple public records requests to the Georgia Public Defender Council. The state agency represents 85% of people charged with crimes. But in a letter the Southern Center sent to the state's attorney general, it claims the council is intentionally making records difficult to obtain by overcharging for documents and providing increasingly incomplete records.
And many of these records are records that have been provided to us in the past. The only thing that has shifted in this time period is the amount of media attention and the public scrutiny that the Georgia Public Defender Council is receiving right now.
An Atlanta News First investigation exposing a constitutional crisis impacting court systems in Georgia.
4 months, multiple Atlanta News First investigations have shed light on the shortages of public defenders. At least 620 people charged with crimes in the state did not have a lawyer this past summer, and its impact on the state's criminal justice system. A problem the director of the Public Defender Council has struggled to admit exists.
This last 2 years have been the most phenomenal.
Despite judges across the state saying otherwise.
Welcome, Judge. Nice to have you with us.
Including Arthur Smith, president of Georgia's Council of Superior Court Judges, who has experienced the problem in his own courtroom.
We have too few public defenders for the work to be done.
I've been very consistent with letting him know that he's not doing this by himself.
Maurice's mother hopes her son will one day have an opportunity to tell his side of the story to a jury. 2 of the 4 co-defendants in Maurice's case have already been found not guilty. Until then, she'll continue writing to him and waiting.
Nobody's listening. It's been 10 years and nobody has listened.
Welcome to this edition of The Defender.
This is the best that we have done in the last 2 years.
Amateo Ali raves about her accomplishments as the director of the Georgia Public Defender Council in a video posted on YouTube this past March.
We have more funding than we've ever had in the history of the agency, and that's the last 2 years.
An apparent attempt to put a positive spin on a state agency struggling to live up to its obligation to provide legal representation to people accused of crimes who could not afford a lawyer. Over the past 5 months, Atlanta News First investigations uncovered people in county jails across Georgia, legally innocent, waiting for trial, but without an attorney, a violation of the Sixth Amendment of the Constitution.
Do you have a lawyer? Is anyone come to speak with you? No?
So he's kind of like stuck. He doesn't have no representation at all, no help at all.
Nobody's listening. It's been 10 years and nobody has listened.
According to agency records we uncovered, the Defender Council has hired multiple public relation firms to change the narrative, using taxpayer money to do it. Tobin Inc. is one of them. According to its $4,500 contract, the company provided the agency with thought leadership, social media strategy, and on-call crisis communication. Internal emails show the Defender Council hired Tobin Inc. 2 weeks after Atlanta News First interviewed Director Ali in November, asking her to respond to judges' frustration over shortages in court-appointed attorneys.
So these are people who don't know what's going on in-house.
Even judges.
Even judges.
3 months later, the Defender Council hired another public relations company, Lucy Content. It's run by former local television journalists.
Our job is to shine a light on all the good that people, businesses, nonprofits are doing.
The taxpayer cost to hire Lucy $24,500. According to its contract, the media company will provide help with overall messaging, develop narrative opportunities, and social media support. Since employing Lucy, the agency increased posting on its Facebook page, including congratulating employees on awards, but also about International Jugglers Day, National Golfers Day, and even Caramel Popcorn Day.
What's what I'm looking for? It's jargon.
Andrew Fleischman is a former public defender who worked at the agency. We shared the public relations contracts and the YouTube video with him.
I feel as though they're saying, oh, okay, people think we're doing a bad job because we're getting bad press, instead of thinking, oh, we're getting bad press because we're doing a bad job.
Director Ali did not respond to our request for an interview for this story, but an email staff wrote, "We seek to engage and educate the public by showcasing the positive impact of our work, calling it a cost-effective tool to improve employee recruitment."
My response is that it's unusual for a government agency to have to spend taxpayer dollars to persuade taxpayers that their money is being spent wisely.
Let me tell you what the real deal is.
In the Defender Council's 15-minute video, Director Ali spends most of the time talking about herself and her accomplishments since appointed by the governor in 2021. Here's the only time she recognizes issues facing her agency and people waiting for legal representation.
Now, do we have challenges? Yes, we do. We sometimes don't have enough employees.
It seems to me like she believes she is doing a tremendous job. She just held herself to a very low standard.
Are there any other matters with regard to scheduling for these motion hearings?
Maurice Jimerson appears before a judge this week, his attorney hoping his client can finally get his day in court.
This case has been languishing for a while, so I prefer a July setting if possible.
Arrested for murder in 2013, he spent the past 10 years behind bars, awaiting trial. A jury acquitted 2 of his co-defendants for the same crime years ago.
You don't need a law degree to know there's something wrong here. But that will just...
Andrew Fleischman is Maurice's attorney. He's representing the 32-year-old for free after hearing about his case on Atlanta News First this past April.
Even if I tell somebody that Maurice, where is Maurice? How is Maurice? Well, Maurice is still locked up. They don't believe it because it's been 10 years.
How rare is this?
This is the longest that someone has been held pre-trial in American history.
In American history.
As far as I can tell, yeah.
Andrew says the delay is a clear violation of the Sixth Amendment of the Constitution, which guarantees everyone accused of a crime the right to an attorney if they can't afford one and the right to a speedy trial.
We should not punish people until we've proven they've committed a crime.
An Atlanta News First investigation uncovered Maurice isn't the only person accused of a crime in Georgia whose constitutional rights are in jeopardy. In Fulton County, the state's largest, court records show at least 13,000 felony cases not indicted by grand juries last year. That's thousands of people arrested by police, booked in jail, but never officially charged with the crime.
Feels awful. Feels terrible.
Quintrevious Nelson is one of them, arrested in 2020 for aggravated assault, a crime he claims he did not commit. For nearly 3 years, he's been under house arrest with no formal charges, required to wear this ankle monitor at all times, which cost him $300 a month. Not in jail, but a prisoner in his own home.
I'm 26 now. This has been on me since I was 22. So I done missed out on a lot of things, graduations, celebrations, funerals. It's like life just still going and I'm just stuck in one spot.
Last year, he filed this application with the Georgia Public Defender Council, requesting an attorney. He says the agency still hasn't appointed one to him.
And it's hard.
Quandria is his mother.
It's been hard. It's like running into brick wall after brick wall because we don't know everything that we need to do. And when we try to get help, we just don't have it.
There are a number of motions.
Back in Dougherty County, Maurice's attorney filed a motion to dismiss the case, hoping the judge will recognize holding someone a decade behind bars to face charges is against the law.
We have a presumption that people are innocent, and that means we're not supposed to punish them until after a jury has found beyond a reasonable doubt that they're guilty of something.
They're stuck, they're silenced, and they don't have a next court date.
After a series of Atlanta News First investigations the past year,
The system has failed us.
exposing people charged with crimes across Georgia who don't have an attorney.
It's like running into brick wall after brick wall.
The Southern Center for Human Rights filed a lawsuit Monday claiming the Georgia Public Defender Council is deliberately withholding public records that could reveal the scope of the state's crisis. The agency responsible for appointing lawyers to people who cannot afford one.
The consequences are very severe when people go unrepresented in their criminal cases.
Maya Chowdhury is an attorney with the Civil Rights Organization.
Right now, there are hundreds of people across Georgia who are languishing in jail for months and sometimes years without representation. This is a serious violation of people's constitutional rights.
According to the lawsuit, the Southern Center claims the Defender Council is charging unreasonable fees, delaying the production of records, improperly withholding records, and failing to produce all responsive records, including complete lists of persons awaiting appointment of counsel. For example, Maurice Jimerson, currently charged with murder, has qualified for a court-appointed attorney for years. When the Southern Center requested all names of individuals appointed or seeking a lawyer from the agency earlier this year, Maurice wasn't on the list. The 32-year-old has spent more than a decade behind bars, waiting trial.
You don't need a law degree to know there's something wrong here.
Attorney Andrew Fleischman now represents Maurice pro bono after seeing his story on Atlanta News First in April.
This is the longest that someone has been held pre-trial in American history.
In American history.
As far as I can tell, yeah.
The lawsuit also alleges the agency stopped complying with the state's Open Records Act after increased media scrutiny, citing multiple Atlanta News First investigations in the complaint.
An Atlanta News First investigation exposes hundreds of Georgians accused of crimes sitting in jail without legal representation.
Last year, records obtained from the Defender Council revealed at least 600 people charged with crimes who did not have an attorney. When the Southern Center recently requested updated numbers, the agency claims those same records no longer exist.
None of this is in compliance with the Act. In fact, the Georgia Public Defender Agency has violated almost every requirement of the Act that applies to them.
It feels good to be able to get out.
When Travius Nelson is doing something for the first time in years, many of us take for granted.
Just being out on the road, man, you know, especially on a day like this, the sun out, you know, just cruising and just being free.
For nearly 3 years, he was under house arrest and attached to this ankle monitor following a 2022 arrest for aggravated assault he says he did not commit. Fulton County's district attorney did not indict him, never officially charging him with a crime. Here's what Contravius told Atlanta News First in May.
I'm 26 now. This been on me since I was 22. So I done missed out on a lot of things, graduations, celebrations, funerals. It's like life just still going and I'm just stuck in one spot.
You can't even count the time because you never get that back. It's just lost.
We learned about his case from an email sent by his mom.
The subject line, it says help. As my son sits here in shackles and bondage and his time and life continues to get stolen and wasted away. Help.
Afterwards, Atlanta News First reached out to the Georgia Public Defender Council, the state agency responsible for appointing lawyers to people accused of crimes who cannot afford one. And a short time later, the district attorney's office filed this at the clerk's office, writing it was declining to prosecute the case, citing prosecutorial discretion for the only reason.
What was your reaction?
I was in tears. I was so grateful, like so grateful.
And after sleeping and bathing with the ankle monitor for years, here's the moment.
This is an amazing day.
Are you ready?
It was finally taken off.
And it's done.
And it's done in the name of Jesus. We thank you.
What was it like having that ankle monitor finally come off?
Man, it felt good, man. I ain't even gonna, it felt amazing. You know, just to be able to do whatever you want, whenever you want, and how you want to do it.
Contravius is far from the only one in Georgia who has faced enormous consequences without prosecutors first proving they committed a crime. In December, Fulton County's chief judge signed this order, suspending defendants' ability to request a speedy trial, citing the pandemic and an overwhelming backlog of cases for the reason. The result? Thousands of people accused of crimes in the county unable to move their cases forward for years, delaying justice for crime victims and people who want to prove their innocence. Last year, Fulton County court records show at least 13,000 people arrested by police, booked in jail, but never officially charged with the crime. A report by the American Civil Liberties Union during the same year estimates 500 of them were detained in the county jail 90 days or longer.
The backlog could indeed take years to resolve.
Georgia Supreme Court Chief Justice Michael Boggs acknowledged the problem to state lawmakers earlier this year, offering no clear pathway to fix it.
Meanwhile, and not surprisingly, the number of pending criminal cases grows larger. And so does the wait for defendants charged but not convicted of crimes who are sitting in local jails awaiting throughout this state indictment or trial.
You don't never understand how good it is until it's gone or until you can't exercise it anymore.
Freedom from a judicial system failing thousands of Georgians waiting too long for their day in court.
Just do better, you know, you got people's lives in your hands and you holding people's lives up and it's time. You'll never get time back.
Okay, this is a cartridge case, right? It's part of what's called a cartridge.
Jeff Gilliran breaks down what happens next after someone pulls the trigger of a gun.
Strikes the back of this cartridge, sets off a little explosion. The bullet gets shooting through the barrel.
As the chief attorney in the forensics division for Maryland's Office of the Public Defender, he works to discredit flawed forensics, masquerading as science used by prosecutors in criminal cases.
There's markings on the back.
Ballistics matching is among them.
That were created by the gun.
It's a technique used by firearm examiners who claim they can identify a bullet fired from a specific gun based on the markings it leaves behind.
The discipline essentially boils down to, I know a match when I see it. So we don't know how many times firearms examiners have gotten it wrong.
Maryland's Forensics Division is one of 11 specialized units within the state's public defender system that offer expert legal defense typically only afforded by the wealthy, now available to the poor who cannot afford an attorney. Natasha Dartigue is head of this state agency.
The quality of your representation should not matter by how large or how small your bank account is.
So why travel 700 miles to highlight Maryland's public defender system? It still faces employee retention and caseload challenges as Georgia does, but experts believe the training and resources it provides to its attorneys vastly improves the quality of legal representation.
Other specialized units in Maryland's system include lawyers with expertise in parental defense, mental health, and a social workers division. While a few of Georgia's urban judicial circuits like Atlanta have similar resources, it's not available statewide. Lisa Monet Wayne is executive director of the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers.
That allows lawyers to be lawyers and not have to be social workers and paralegals and investigators. You have all of those things staffed. Also in those specialized units, those lawyers are able to train other lawyers.
This past May, the Georgia Public Defender Council announced a new specialized unit, but it has nothing to do with improving the quality of representation. It's called the Cross-Circuit Representation Program, which requires attorneys to travel across the state to rural counties that do not have enough attorneys.
I tend to travel the state trying murder cases.
Here's one of those public defenders speaking to a Fulton County judge about it last year, explaining the challenges of traveling to so many counties.
But yes, it is not sustainable for me personally to be in multiple places at the same time.
Some of Georgia's court-appointed attorneys juggle hundreds of cases at a time. Maryland admits its attorney caseloads can be high too.
But here's the bottom line. If I'm carrying 1,000 cases, it doesn't matter how well trained I am, it doesn't matter how many specialty task force may be within the system, I'm overwhelmed. I can't do it.
I don't know if you can see this hole right here, but that's where the bullet would be.
An attempt to better defend those who cannot afford to defend themselves, a system Georgia could look to level the playing field in court.
You can't defend a modern criminal prosecution unless you have resources like us.